Very good morning, everybody. Welcome to Stream 2 of the Breakouts here at Digit Leader 2021. I'm Ray Bugg, founder of Digit. I'm going to be hosting this session. We're delighted to welcome a couple of great speakers who have actually contributed to Digit events before, and they're so good we invited them back. Our first speaker will be Puneet Sachdev from the Singularity Lab. He's going to be very much talking about human capital, but very much with a focus about how you value your people within your respective organisation. He's going to be speaking for the next 25 minutes. We'll have a few questions, but in the meantime, Puneet, over to you.
Right, thank you, Ray. Good morning, everyone. Well, it's good evening over here. I'm speaking to you from Adelaide in Australia. So before I get into, my talk track, which is what Ray spoke about, valuing our people, I actually want to take a few moments out to acknowledge the scourge that COVID-19 has been on several families around the world, in the UK, and horrifically more recently in India. And, if you're from India or you have any kind of kinship with people from India, it's likely you know somebody or the other who has lost a loved one. For me, it hit home. For me and my family, it was up close and personal. Today, exactly 1 month ago, I lost my dad. He was 77 years old. And it makes for a bittersweet, it has been a bittersweet period of time. Bitter because, of course, there are no more WhatsApp calls with dad. He's back. He was back in Delhi. No speaking about golf, cricket, work, what's happening in the IPL. None of that's happening. And I also know when I go back to Delhi, whenever that happens, it's going to be very strange. So I just wanted to acknowledge what's been happening around the world with it. Sweet because we can look forward, his family can look forward to rejoining him on his, once we make our eternal journey, we'll rejoin dad and my sister and all of us will be back over there. On the other side of it, I also want to acknowledge Digit and all of us who are present over here today to still carry forward, to carry the human spirit forward, doing the work that we are doing to move life and humanity forward. So thank you, all of you, for being present over here. Ray, thanks for organizing the conference, Pete, and your entire team. Right, so let's move on now. Okay, so emotions. Emotions rule every aspect of our lives, from our health to how we learn, to how we work and we make decisions. Now, we've evolved to live in a world which looks like this. And at work, that can look something like this. Now, the timeless truth that Maya Angelou has beautifully put into words is really what we are here today to discuss. What this means in a workplace setting, how we make our people feel valued and respected for who they are, and their talents and the abilities that they bring to the table in service of the organizing mission of your respective companies. So my talk track today is creating a human-centered employee experience. It's a very vast subject. So on your behalf, I have taken the liberty to just pick out 3 or 4 key items which I feel will be essential, which really are the heartbeat of developing a great employee experience for the people that work for you. So EX, or employee experience, I've given away a little bit on the next slide, is the sunshine, the soil, and the water for your organization. It is, in fact, the secret behind 25% higher profitability. It is also the secret behind the delivery of an excellent customer experience. And it is also the secret behind improving the retention of those 15 or so critical roles that deliver over 50% organizational value. That's really true. It's been researched. Organizations of a certain size and scale, there are 15 discrete roles which deliver more than 50% org value. So let's see what is employee experience. I'll talk a bit about mapping employee experience. And I'll then I'll take a deeper dive into listening at scale. And then the morning after essentially is what are some actions that you can take tomorrow in the morning at 9 o'clock in the morning. Right. Okay. So it's not what you're thinking about. I think I gave it away on the last slide. This is not a late night TV show topic, and there is no alphabet missing. EX is employee experience. So employee experience actually equals everything as you would imagine. It's the complete experience that you and your fellow employees, they have of the workplace. And this goes through the various stages of the employee life cycle, right from the time they say hi to the time they say goodbye. Now, just think about experience, right? So, I just wanted to take a moment to think about your favorite restaurant, right? So, perhaps where you go most often with your partner. It's a great experience that draws you back again and again and even recommend it on Yelp. So, let's just call this restaurant the Ivy. And if you're in Edinburgh, then Ivy on the Square could be the restaurant. I love that place. They have fantastic truffle oil chips with Parmesan cheese. Really yummy, worth going for. Anyway, and also on the other hand, there are certainly places that you would not recommend at all. Perhaps these places you've gone to dine and the service was so poor, the experience was so poor that you left and you headed out elsewhere. Let's just call this restaurant Pong. Okay. Now your workplace is like a restaurant. The only difference is that your guests are your employees. They come in with the intention to enjoy a meal, spend a few years, have a great experience, do great work, even wash some of the dishes while they are over there, and leave good reviews. It's no different whether it is you yourself, me over here, or the teams that we manage. We all want the same things at the end of the day. And here's the deal, right? As the leaders and line managers who are present over here, you get to decide whether you want to create an Ivy experience or you want to create a Pong experience. And the greater the value and the voice of your role, the greater is your impact on designing the employee experience. So, what I want to do is just think about it for a moment. Think about it, it's actually stepping into an ecosystem. Getting to work, whether it's in a physical building or getting to work, is an entire ecosystem. So, thinking about employee experience could become the new lens and the organizing principle for how you may want to think about your people, the people related practices, and the processes and the methods. And particularly if you are in the supporting functions like HR, legal, facilities, etc., which have a much more direct impact on the experience of the people. Of course, the line manager has the most significant impact. The deal is this, that employee experience is an evolution from employee engagement. So we've all heard about those annual employee engagement surveys or the 6 monthly employee engagement surveys. So employee experience was, at that time when mainly the thrust was employee engagement, this mainly looked like surveys which happened once in a while. The difficulty with the employee engagement surveys was that we really did not find out what's working, what's not working till after the fact. We were still delivering an employee experience, but we had no way to put a stethoscope on the heartbeat of the people in the organization throughout their journey to find out, hey, what's up? Before we get to the other end and there's an ailment which we've got to solve for. And that's where employee experience, that's the point of departure. The employee experience mindset is more an agile construct, and it's more than it is waterfall. And so it's very much in the moment listening, iterating all the time as we go along, taking the actions, which will be real time, so we can solve the employee related challenges, the problem that they are having, so that they can then in turn serve our customers in the best possible manner. At the bottom on the right hand side, what you see are some of the organizations that have got dedicated teams and roles towards employee experience. Airbnb, Mark Levy of Airbnb in San Francisco was the one who actually coined the term employee experience going back in time. Okay, and what you see over there, the millennials, the incredible demand for top talent, social media, transparency, investors getting interested in people metrics. These are some of the driving factors which have thrust employee experience to the forefront. Right, so let's move on. Right, so this is just about data to give us perspective on the linkage between employee experience and business impact. And it's not a very tenuous link, maybe even one or two degrees of separation. What you see over here is Willis Towers Watson. They are a Chicago-based consultancy, and they conducted a short survey of 34 items. They surveyed employees and they tracked the scores across 120 client organizations to just try to decipher what is the relationship between employee experience of a great superlative employee experience and the business results. I suppose we all know it conceptually. It's got to make sense, right? If you feel good, you're doing good work, you have what you require to do your work very well, you will do a great job, your engagement will be higher. And being a consultancy, what they may want to do is to get the numbers to back up what their hypothesis is so they can take that to clients and talk about it in an informed manner. And this, what you see over here, is the result of some of the research that they have conducted. And there is a direct correlation between the employee experience and the business results. And over here, what we're seeing is it's impacting top line growth, it impacts bottom line profitability and shareholder and return and the value to shareholders as well. Strong EX are the purple bars over there. And as you can see, poor and average, you can just see the difference between these three different kinds of experiences that organizations are delivering and the business results. On the bottom, what I have put down over there are some of the additional metrics that you will see will be impacted depending on the nature of the employee experience you're creating for your people. The Net Promoter Score, the attrition rates, especially of what we call regrettable attrition, the people that you do not want to see leaving the organization, and the employee engagement levels and scores. You can expect to see these metrics getting impacted. And adding to that, this is just some more data. This is an MIT research, once again proving the difference between top quartile for companies with employee experience versus those that are delivering bottom quartile experience. So there is a significant difference over there as well. So all in all, what we are moving towards is what we are saying is we're getting from this mindset or this notion of recruiting to motivate and retain to finding top talent and really making them successful, giving them the employee experience that makes them successful. And if they are successful, they in turn will make the business successful by serving the customers, internal or external, in a much more effective manner. And the clear line of linkage between employee experience and business results is employee experience drives employee engagement levels, how much you can feel connected to the organization. The higher is the connection, the higher is the discretionary effort that you put into your work, which drives higher business results. Right, so now let's have a look at a couple of key elemental parts of the employee experience. So I'm going to talk about the mapping of the employee experience journey, and then after that, we'll talk about listening at scale. So what are the first few steps that you can do as you get onto defining what your employee experience needs to look like? Just have a sip of water very quickly. Right. So as you get into the employee experience mindset, one of the first things that you want to do is to really create a sandbox of employee experience, right? What is your framework? What is in scope? What's out of scope? Like you would do any kind of organizational project. The ownership, the roles, the responsibilities, what are the business outcomes that you're after, the success criteria, the budgets. Roughly what we see as a trend is organizations investing in employee experience. They tend to have an additional 13% added on to their HR budget. That may or may not be the case in your organization, but some of the data proves that to be the point. Right. So the first step is really building out that framework as to what does employee experience mean for your organization and getting to the nitty-gritties, putting out a roadmap. The core elements over here, journey mapping and listening, these primarily, they are the drivers and they are measures of the employee experience. And I will get into these in a little more detail. And action taking refers to, right, you've done the journey mapping, we've done the listening. It's going to go nowhere if the action is not synchronized with the listening. And we'll talk about that as well shortly. Right. So let's have a look at this journey mapping. Now, this is something which I think is more from the customer experience domain, which has now been mapped over into the people people and culture domain over here. Now, journey mapping, it's also a useful method to identify the touch points and the moments that matter during the entire life cycle of the employees. Now, what you're seeing over here is the traditional life cycle that an employee will go through. They will, recruitment is going to happen. Your HR team is going to go and get the people into the organization. There's going to be some activities before there, the onboarding part of it, where they meet the manager, meet the teams, 2 or 3 months, get used to the organization. Then comes the development, the retention of the people, of the talent you want to keep in the organization. And eventually, at some point in time, there is going to be the exit. Now, just going back and back what I shared earlier on with the employee engagement mindset, where we were doing these annual or biannual surveys, it was really impossible to understand how the personal experiences are shaping the key outcomes of the employee experience. What is really driving their engagement into the organization, their commitment to the organization, their motivation and their productivity. There was no real way to find out till after everything was done, till we got the data from the surveys. So increasingly now organizations are taking a life cycle approach to employee experience, and we're looking to capture feedback and insights at every stage of the life cycle. What you see over here are the traditional stages of the life cycle, but that is not only it, right? So there are other stages, there are other moments in time that you can further define, which could be relevant to the experience that your people have. For example, if relocation happens fairly frequently, you want to understand the impact of that before and after. Parental leave, what's happening before and after. So you get to define what it is that you want to put down in addition to the traditional points in time. Traditionally, those points is where the organization tends to spend a lot of money. So that's why we track what's going on along the different stages there. So just to distinguish moments that matter and touch points. So moments that matter are the ones that make an impression, and they're somewhat emotion evoking in nature, right? So for example, if you see over here on the left-hand side, the first contact with the manager, the interview that the person is having, the first contact manager interview that the person is having is a fairly emotional experience. So that's a moment that will make a difference to the employee experience. So we want to track that. We want to have some listening around it. And associated with each and every stage are going to be some or the other business metrics you want to put alongside that. Now, these can be done on a spreadsheet. You can do that on a software. There are multiple ways of doing it, right? So the few things you want to be aware of as you get into this part, as you get into defining an employee experience and journey mapping, is the question you want to answer first of all is, are you going to have only one journey map for all the employees? And that's a great starting point, no problem with that. Or do you want to create multiple employee personas and then journey map each of the personas, identifying the moments that matter, identifying how we're going to measure each of these and how we are actually going to find out what's going on at each of these different stages? And that's where technology can really aid the listening part of it, right? Okay, so for this to work, as you can see, this is a very data-oriented approach, and the organization would need to have some kind of a culture of feedback, and feedback being viewed, in fact, as an act of caring and not really something which is punitive and reprimanding in nature. So those will be a few things to be aware of as you get into this. There's a cultural side to it as well, right? Okay, moving on. So moments that matter, how do you actually go ahead and define the moments that matter? The key thing over here is to co-design, right? So design with and not for, as we say these days. And I've summarized this in some steps. This is not the exhaustive list, but it should give you a good guidance as to what the stages and the steps for defining your moments that matter on the journey map can look like. So as you begin that journey, what is critically important is a cross-functional group from the various support functions and the business, and ensure that it is diverse and inclusive to make sure you're touching upon DE&I. Providing context to the group and the objective will help them understand the value proposition of what you're trying to do, how it makes a difference to the business, and what it means for the customer. That's important for getting their buy-in. Then what you do is you provide the group you included. If you are in HR, especially if you're doing some work in HR, this usually the whole employee experience responsibility ends with the HR leader sponsored by the CEO. That's the way it's usually stacked in organizations, right? So you've got the team. You then give them what your as is journey map is, whatever it looks like today, the listening that you're doing, the KPIs you got associated with it, the data you got around it, put that together, and then provide them the criteria for defining moments that matter. And those are 6 items you can see on the right hand side. They've got to be inclusive, emotion generating, scalable, frequent, business aligned, and also aligned to the critical talent. Provide the criteria, provide the context, and then get together and define your journey map. Once you've done that, the prioritization of it, alignment with the senior leadership, and then what's also important really is to define who the owners are for those moments that matter. And what you will see is that the majority of the owners of these moments that are critical, that matter to the employee experience, to the engagement levels and the business performance, is going to be with the managers, right? So then what we also want to be doing is there will be others. HR will be a key role. Supporting functions will also be there in there. But by and large, the critical moments that matters, a lot of them rest with line managers. What you want to be doing is then getting together the owners of these moments that matter and really understand where they would like to be supported so they can do the work they've got to be doing. And just from a number standpoint, roughly 285 touch points across the entire journey, 60% touch points owned by HR, 97 criticals of moments that matter by the managers. So moments that matter, emotional items, touch points are the items which make the moment that matter happen. So if the moment that matter is the first interview with the manager, then the touch points are all the coordination, emailing, conversations, everything which happened prior to that, which led to creating the moment that matter. Right, so let's go on to the next part of this, which is listening at scale, which really is fundamentally where we get real with what's going on in the organization. So you may recall that we've got the life cycle of the employee. I've just used the traditional one. Of course, this will go right across the entire journey map that you create for your people. Now, over here, what you're seeing is I've put down some examples of what listening can look like at different stages. Surveys, one-to-one meetings, 360 feedback, inclusion survey, well-being, exit interviews, etc. Now, when we talk about listening in the context of employee experience, we are talking about a continuous listening strategy, as you would have figured out by now. And it's about gathering feedback more often across the entire life cycle. Now, what it does not mean is that surveying people every week, every month, and if the employees are giving you feedback and they're seeing nothing is being done, as you would imagine, they'll begin to lose faith in what you're doing over there. So the bottom line really over here is do not ask questions that you're not ready to take action on, and only survey as frequently as you can act. Now, one key thing which I want to bring to your attention is Josh Bersin is the oracle of HR. And I think he interviewed or he did some research across 500 organizations. He found out that out of 84 practices correlated against business outcomes, listening was by far the best predictor of excellence. So I think it's really important for us to know that it's research proven. And also the fact that, listening is great, it's critical, it's important, but it has to be followed up by close action. Otherwise, it's going to fall flat on its face, right? And over here, listening does not always mean it is tech-enabled. We're going to have a balance of technology and touch. So one-to-one conversation with the managers, conversation with the leadership teams, etc. So that's one more item which you want to bear in mind, balancing tech and touch. Qualtrics and Microsoft Viva are employee experience platforms. They'll help you do the entire journey mapping, moments that matter, all of that stuff. Whereas Culture Amp and Perceptics are phenomenal technologies which are designed mainly for employee listening. That's what they mainly do over here, right? And in between over there, what you see, those four: culture of listening, technology for scaling, managers, inclusion, and empathy. These are going to be some fundamental aspects you want to bear in mind as you create an employee experience for the organization. Right, moving on. So let's see over here some actions that you can take at 9 o'clock in the morning tomorrow. So for the leaders, I won't go through the entire list over here, but here are some questions which I've put down, which you could ask your head of HR or whoever the owner of your people, if it's people and culture, whoever the head of people and culture and HR is in the organization. These are some questions that you can actually ask them tomorrow in the morning to find out about where you are on employee value proposition, what's the kind of listening they're doing, or so on and so forth. Line managers, of course, getting clarity on their role, but the most important thing for line managers is the weekly one-to-one with the teams. Having a set of questions, both you and your direct reports are going to ask of each other, and then action taking on the back of that. Regular meetings every other month with the team, etc. So this is a very, very critical piece: is the interaction of the line manager with the team members. So as you can see, 97% of the critical moment that matters are owned by line managers. And last but not the least, if you are people and culture, if you're a leader of HR, then these are some starting points for you to think about as you move along on this journey. Now, what I will do is I'm going to put all of this into an article and I'm going to publish it on LinkedIn. So if you want to just link in with me and send me a message saying the Digit talk or presentation, I'll be sure when I publish it, I can also I can tag you in there. So all what I've written, I'll put it into a decent article. And now before I wrap up my talk over here, I wanted to tell you a quick story. You may have seen this on LinkedIn recently. I picked it up day before yesterday, actually. So right now, here's the deal. A father said to his daughter, "Since you have graduated with honors, here's a car that I bought many years ago. It's pretty old now, but before I give it to you, take it to the used car lot downtown and tell them how much will they buy it for." So she comes back saying, "Well, they've said they'll give me $1,000 for that." Then he asks the daughter, "Hey, why don't you go to the local pawn shop and see what they would offer?" She comes back saying that $100 is what they're saying because it's a very old car. And then the father asked his daughter to go to the car club and show the car. Then the daughter goes there and she comes back really excited. She said, "Some of the people in the car club even offered me $100,000 for this car. They said that it's an iconic car and it is valued by many of the collectors." Now, the father says this to his daughter: "The right place values you in the right way. And if you're not valued, do not be angry. It just simply means you are in the wrong place. Those who know your value are those who appreciate you. Never stay in a place where no one sees your value." So, well, the moral of the story, as you may have guessed, is that value your people. Tell them as often as you can that they are. And we do that in the context of employee experience by creating memorable and meaningful experiences for them for the brief duration of the time they are in the organization. Because the thing is this, that the experience that we as leaders, as people will lead them with, will become the experiences that they will then go ahead and create for the next generations as they become leaders, leading even some of your children and grandchildren when they come of age. So it's a very, very powerful loop, positive loop that we can create. It's like the butterfly effect of the small actions that you will take today will have a lasting impact for a very long time. And I wanted to end with this quote, which I started with, of Maya Angelou. that people will forget what you said. They'll forget what you did, but they're never going to forget how you make them feel. So that really is what I wanted to share with all of you today. Thank you.
Puneet, thank you very, very much. Lovely presentation. Good to have you back as well at Digit. A question that's coming from the floor, and I know we're very close to using up our 30 minutes, but I wanted to pose a question from the floor is there a tendency for organizations to go slightly overkill in terms of employee feedback? Now, that's quite an open question.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure if they're referring to, are they using it just to boost their CSR and their presence in the market?
Yeah.
Are they doing it to give employees the impression that that they matter? Or is there genuine sentiment behind it? Take from that what you will.
Yeah. So just a couple of things. I know we're on time over here. I don't want to take too much of time. One is that it's got to be, first of all, grounded in your employee value proposition. And there's a lot there's a lot of back work which goes into even stepping into EX. But the quick answer to this is very simple. What you do is you start small and you scale. The whole agile approach. You take it, you use it in one part of the organization, do it small, see what's working, what's not working, get a sense of what's an overkill, what's not an overkill, speak to the people, ask them. They will tell you. Ask the people how often do they want to be asked, how often they want to be listened to, and then make sure you take the action. So it's really going to come down to start small, trial in one place, trial in another place, get a sense of what is the right balance, and then move from there. I'm happy to connect with the people and have a separate conversation at some other point as well through LinkedIn.
And excellent, good to know. And what I've done is I've actually dropped in your LinkedIn profile into the chat as well, so people can connect with you separately as well and get view of that article you're going to be putting up. But on behalf of myself and the Digit team, lovely to see you back. Thank you for staying up late to speak for us all the way from Adelaide in Australia. I think you are probably now our most distant speaker we've ever had at Digit, and as ever, we're very grateful and look forward to welcoming you back. Thank you very much indeed, Puneet. Right, folks. Next up is another great speaker that we've had on the Digit stand before, both physically and virtually over the years. I think this is probably, Andy, your 5th or 6th time speaking for us. You're that good. We keep inviting you back. Andy's a 35-year veteran of the storage industry. He's still not entirely satisfied with it, I hasten to add. He's witnessed all the technical changes and the marvelry that we experienced within the storage industry over the years, but he still thinks there's an element of stupidity involved. I'm going to let you elaborate on that, Andy. Best of luck. Thank you very much.
No worries. Okay. Good morning, everyone. And thanks, Ray, for this opportunity to speak. And thanks, Puneet. That was really interesting, Puneet. Great presentation. Tough act to follow. Look, I'm going to try and make this interesting and I hope maybe a little bit challenging for people, especially if you are connected with the IT infrastructure and the storage side, in particular of your businesses. So I'm going to talk about how the cloud will save you from the 5 most stupid things about enterprise file storage. And I say that with some passion because I've lived this on both sides. Now, this is just what I think. I'd love to know if you see it differently. But anyway, I'm Andy. These days, my job is I run sales for Nasuni here in Europe and elsewhere. But I have been around the storage industry for many decades. And on both sides, I was IT director of one of the global banks in London back in the 90s, one of NetApp's early customers. I was actually involved in storage back in Australia before that as well. And, file, unstructured data, it really matters in businesses. It's kind of the lifeblood. It's used by some CIOs as like duct tape to join people and processes together. And it's sometimes the glue between human and machine processes as well. And more importantly, it's 80 or 90% of the enterprise data storage in most environments. And I have seen a lot of change over all these years. And I think that there's some kind of stupid things that we do with file storage that I think can change. And I think that the catalyst for that change is the cloud. And the ways in which cloud can impact the way we do so many things in IT and in our lives in general. So here's this guy. He's looking a little skeptical, so we'll see what he thinks. So what do we think of the 5 most stupid things we could say perhaps about on-prem NAS in particular is really what I'm thinking about. And let's start with running out of disk space. For many of us, this has been the only way to manage file storage historically, with finite fixed capacity per location. Buy another shelf when you run out of space. You need more in Paris, but you've bought more than you need in London, and it's just not fungible. Now in 2021, thanks to the cloud, there are better options, but there are also some tricks to the trade of leveraging that near infinite and very low cost capacity that is in the cloud for our file storage at our on-prem locations, which we'll get into in a little bit as to how Nasuni, amongst others, can help with that. Then there's backup, and it's often not just a single backup copy. People tend to want multiple copies, dailies, weeklies, monthlies, and so on. Plus, of course, offsite copies. And you might have some old tape, like old LTO versions, you maybe even can't read from anymore. And yet we keep making copy after incessant copy of this stuff. And that's both expensive and leads to the next problem, which I regard as the Achilles heel of storage: backup, recovery, and archive. It's always been the restore process that's really been the hard part of this. Horror stories abound of images taking days to rebuild and recover from the cloud or any other backup media. For one of our customers, Pernod Ricard, I'll tell you their story a bit later. They make alcohol. They're one of my favorite customers, I have to say. It took them 3 business days to rebuild their NetApp files on-prem. Actually, that was at their office in Amsterdam after an outage, for example. The business didn't like that. It was simple physics. There was this much data that had to be got back there. There was this much bandwidth, and it just took time. So I think that there are better ways, but restore and the time it takes, that's the stupid thing about file storage. One of the stupid things about file storage, I would suggest. Now, the luxury of dedicated backup admins and storage admins might not be practical for everyone, or you might use a third-party external, I don't know, Wipro, Capgemini, someone like that to do it for you. But IT these days requires everyone to manage more and to be able to do it remotely in recent circumstances. And having to integrate, complex primary NAS, secondary storage, backup, DR, robo sites and their requirements, the WAN infrastructure that glues it all together, has created hugely complex and expensive solutions, which leads me, of course, to the fifth and possibly most important stupid thing, is that all of this costs just way too much. And it's not just cost, but also the time it takes. You may not have time to manage it all, and that leaves the business at risk. What if you haven't tested your backups are working or your recovery processes, and only find they're not up to it after you've suffered a ransomware attack, perhaps, for example? So that's what I think are some of the most stupid things. If you guys have a different view, please feel free to throw in questions or comments or challenge me. I'm pretty robust. I'm able to be told I'm wrong if you think maybe I am. So why have things become like this? More than anything, we think that enterprise file storage has simply become too complex and way more expensive than it needs to be there for. And this is inherent, I believe, in legacy global file storage architectures that are typically seen in enterprise environments, like the example here. Now, I don't know if your environment looks something like this. And if it does, we don't think that's because you're stupid. More, that's what's only been possible with legacy infrastructures. So, typically they would comprise of some kind of primary, like perhaps Windows file servers in front of SAN or standalone NAS or whatever at your primary sites or your main data center, each with their own, separate admin consoles and shelves and timelines. And next there's an RFP on the horizon when the stuff goes end of life, etc. And on top of that, a whole additional infrastructure around backup media, backup software, backup target media servers, as well as the targets that they're writing to, etc., from the usual array of vendors. And then I've possibly got like a mini-me version of that at maybe 1 or 2, or perhaps some of our customers, hundreds of locations around the world, where I also need some vestige of that primary storage and or the backup and restore and probably some separate DR sites. And maybe I hook it all together with a big old WAN, and maybe I do the backups over the WAN to the DR site, or some variation on these themes. But when you add it all together, it does end up being something rather complex, kind of messy. It's all constrained. Each one of the elements of this infrastructure stack has constraints. That might be around capacity. That might be around snapshots, for example. How much data can I keep that I can rapidly return to? That's certainly not all of it. It might be that there are only so many connectors in the back of a controller, and therefore only so many shelves of additional capacity that I can add. And so for some people, that management of file data storage growth is a complex thing in and of itself, let alone the constraints on recovery times that I mentioned. And like I said, it is all quite expensive. So I don't know if all this resonates with any of you, but in my experience, for a lot of on-prem environments, it does. Now, the alternative is a cloud file storage architecture. And for me, the key technology that opens up the possibility of change has been around with us for a little while now, and that's object storage. For those of you that aren't familiar with object storage, it's, for example, AWS S3. Amazon invented this concept of the simple storage solution. It's Microsoft Azure Blob, it's Google Cloud GCP, and others. You know, there's Alibaba, there's Wasabi, there's private cloud on-prem object storage too. If you want to go down that path, there's people like Cloudian, for example, there. Now, what all of those have in common is that object storage is not only incredibly low cost, it doesn't use structures like RAID that we used to rely on historically. It's therefore much cheaper. It's incredibly robust. You can get like 16 nines of durability in your object storage these days. It can be expanded on demand, and for the public cloud, it's practically infinite in capacity and can be accessed anywhere in the world. So all of these are fabulous properties. And what some of us in the industry have done, certainly here at Nasuni, is we've taken that power of object storage and we've built the file system on the object storage instead of at the edge where it lived traditionally. Now, this gives some advantages. This means that the file system can inherit those properties, not only for primary file storage, but because of that infinite capacity, we don't have constraints that we would have had historically. For example, on the number of snapshots. We can have an infinite number of recovery points that we can immediately return to. It's like having an infinite number of snapshots, if you like, but without extra cost for that, for example. What we have to do, though, is not only combine that primary file storage and modern sort of backup and recovery with the built-in DR in the file system, we also need a way to access that from the edge. And edge computing becomes very, very important here. The performance, if we can decouple where the IOPS are delivered, where the throughput is required, if we can decouple that from where the capacity is in the cloud, then essentially we have a machine for the evaporation of latency. And this is how the Nasuni architecture works. We work with Amazon, Microsoft, Google, etc., and we turn that object storage into a global file system that can be accessed anywhere, but without apparent latency on the part of the users at those locations. So the users in New York, London, Sydney, Munich can all see the same files and the same global namespace, and yet experience it like it's all local. And this also enables us to facilitate very rapid file sharing. We just need to move the deltas between these environments. So what I'd like to do in the next few slides is just take you through how a cloud file storage architecture of this sort can impact those 5 issues that we've identified early on. In other words, capacity, complexity, backup, restore, and most importantly, cost. So if you bear with me, I'll step through this in the next few minutes. Won't take us that long. We'll have time for a couple of questions at the end, I think, if you'd like to do that. So historically, with capacity on-prem, we would always run out of something, whether it was the sheer number of terabytes I could stuff into a box, the number of files in a volume, the number of shares in a volume, the number of files in a directory or something like that, or perhaps the number of snapshots or the number of users, the number of locations, whatever it was, there would be a constraint that was born of the box in which I put it. And essentially, we've got an infinitely sized box in the cloud. By moving to a cloud-based file system, we're able to have no limits on any of these parameters that are otherwise inherent in those hardware-based architectures, even if those hardware architectures has been lifted and shifted and put into the cloud. There's plenty of examples of that these days, where the on-prem architecture is now available also in the cloud. But without changing the architecture, you're still going to have a finite amount of disk space, a finite number of files, volumes, and directories, a finite number of snapshots, and a need for separate backup, therefore, a limitation on the number of locations I can access that from, etc. So the cloud and object storage in particular enables us to break through that. We touched on the issue of complexity earlier, so let me give you an example. There are, as I mentioned, plenty of legacy architectures that have been lifted and shifted into the cloud. Cloud Volumes on Tap from NetApp could be an example of that, which takes that on-premises design and lets you run it in the cloud. Now, the problem with this approach is that both the limitations, such as the volume size limits and number of snapshots, and the complexity, the need to integrate multiple technologies, each with its own console, required to deliver what you can otherwise do in a single console if you change that architecture with a global namespace, unified and fully integrated primary and backup, etc. So in this instance, I think we worked out that you would need 7 different tools from that stack joined together to deliver all of those things. And that is an issue for cost, but it's, I think, more importantly, an issue for complexity and reliability, etc. So we think that the cloud gives us an opportunity to simplify and also to reduce cost, and we think people should look seriously at that opportunity. Let's talk about backup, DR, and restore. I'll do all of these in one breath, if you like. With a cloud-based file system architecture, once you've changed that design, you don't require a separate copy of your file data or for backup and DR purposes. So what we're able to do is leverage the infinite and low-cost capacity of object storage, which is itself, the underlying architecture of that is, globally replicated, highly durable, up to 16 nines, can be in multiple racks, in multiple data centers, in multiple geographies, if that's what you want. And we can then implement, on top of that, an infinite number of immediately available recovery points. And you can think of this as infinite snapshots, but unlike snapshots, I don't need the overheads, the reserve space, the extra cost that goes with that. So this enables customers to get really much better SLAs from their recovery side of their operations. So RPOs and RTOs, recovery point objectives, recovery time objectives, can be just minutes and infinite in how far back I can go. You can think of a cloud-based file system as kind of a really big, infinitely large worm drive, if you like, and you can get much better service levels than I could with separate DR and separate backup, etc. Individual files can be recovered to any global location within minutes. We're really just moving pointers in the cloud file system. We don't have to move data, and then we're presenting it through that cache mechanism at the edge. So that you can readily mitigate the impact of ransomware, for example, by rapidly recovering to a point in time just before the encryption event has occurred. And should you lose the hardware at a given location, well, users can still rapidly recover from such a disaster and access their files within minutes without having to wait for the full rebuild, because we can just redirect users to another instance anywhere. Could be running in the cloud, could be running at an office down the road. For example, Pernod Ricard, I touched on before, instead of, if they lost the hardware today at their Amsterdam site, their users would get redirected to Antwerp. It's 50 Ks down the road, and they would see their files immediately there because of the way this technology can work between combining the edge and the cloud. And can't get into the detail of that here, but that's what it does. And you can speak to some of our customers about that if you're interested. So, so I touched on cost, and so cost is the big elephant in the room with storage. I've spent a long time buying storage, investing in storage companies, and selling storage. And the revenue for storage businesses has always just gone up and up and up because it's not optional. It's like toilet paper; you just have to buy more of it. And with the shift to the cloud, what we see in our customer base, and we've been at this for 12 years, we've got 150 petabytes under management tens of thousands of customer locations deployed, is we'll see people typically halve the cost of their current file storage infrastructure, backup and DR costs taken together. And this SaaS model lets you move your on-prem fixed infrastructure, NetApp, Isilon, Windows File Service, etc., to the cloud using an OpEx model, and without the hidden extra costs of backup and DR and all of that we touched on before. And also with the cloud model, you don't have to buy the empty space or the overheads that you would typically need on-prem, because with a cloud model, we just charge people for what they need, not all the raw space that goes with it. Now, I'm in a position today to preview an announcement that we're making next week together with Google. Google Cloud GCP is an important partner for Nasuni. We're making a joint announcement next week. So the marketing gurus let me give you a little preview of this today. So I hope this might be of interest for you. So what we're able to do in partnership with GCP is leverage their particular brand of object storage, which is really very, very low cost and very robust in a way together bundled with Nasuni and available through the Google Cloud Marketplace. And, that works out to 30 pounds, I should say, per terabyte per month, including the primary, the backup, the DR, the global namespace, the unlimited locations, unlimited users, etc. And I just wanted to give you this example of how disruptive this kind of approach can be compared to on-prem infrastructures, and why that's seeing so much adoption. So just to wrap up then, in comparison with the old ways where you used to sort of run out of disk space, we think that it's better to use the cloud because there'll just be no limits. Instead of having to have separate backup copies, having built-in backup and DR gives people big advantages. Instead of it taking longer to restore files and get vaccinated, and this must have been written by our team before the UK got as far as it has with vaccines. I've had both of mine by now. But now we can restore in minutes, of course. And instead of that complexity, just keep it simple and halve those costs. Very briefly, there's customers all over Europe in all sorts of different industries that use this approach. Lots in oil and gas, lots in architecture, engineering, construction, media, pharmaceuticals, and other markets. I'll just give you a couple of quick examples. For example, my friend Morten Madsen, the IT operations manager up at Ramboll in Copenhagen, they've not only replaced their primary file storage at their headquarters there, several petabytes there that used to be, in that case, in NetApp, I think. But last year, when Prime Minister Modi in India told everyone that works that they had to go home, that happened almost overnight. And so they had several locations in India where project data wasn't accessible by their users. And, there just isn't always the work from home infrastructure in every location. So by including that in their global namespace, in their global file system, they were able to have people in Europe at that time work on projects which were otherwise normally being worked on by people in India. And I think that the current environment means that people now need the cloud now more than ever because of the flexibility, agility, as well as the cost savings that it brings. Our good friend Holger Marx, the infrastructure director for Pernod Ricard, one of my favorite customers, not just because of the vodka that they make, also because of the champagne. That was where I gave you the example of their recovery process from Amsterdam now being a completely different story. And there's a couple of quotes there from Holger, and you can look all of this up online. Of course, it's all in print. And in the oil and gas industry, Ithaca, our friend Malcolm Brown up in Aberdeen, he'll tell you that the decision wasn't only about cost. It was also about that complexity, that simplicity, that ease of use that they could bring to their environment as well. So, thanks for listening. I appreciate everyone's time on this. I hope you found it interesting. If you do have a different view on the 5 most stupid things in file storage, tell me I'm wrong. I'm always interested in that conversation. And we've got a booth here at a virtual booth here at the Digit Leader event. And you can go on there and click on some of those things there. Talk to us if you want. Put your card in the hat and win a £500 Amazon gift card as well. So that's all from me, Ray, and I hope everyone found that of interest.
Andy, thank you very, very much indeed. Great to have you back. Some questions, if you don't mind, from the floor and from myself.
Only if they're easy.
Well, I'll let you decide when you answer. One here says, with the shift to the cloud, have you seen an acceleration over the last year with the onset of the pandemic? Has the penny dropped for businesses, particularly in terms of the costs that you mentioned? So there's that operational side of ease of use and with a dispersed workforce and file access. But have people been coming to you saying, Christ, we just realised how much our cloud infrastructure is costing us. We need you to simplify it.
Absolutely. And I would say that one of the effects of the pandemic has been that all kinds of businesses, even those like some public sector that we're working with at the moment that wouldn't have considered this approach before, are suddenly far more understanding of the fact that they just have less visibility on their forward revenues and therefore need to not only be more frugal, they need to move to an OPEX model instead of a capital expense model where you carry those costs for the next 5 years, whether you use the stuff or not. I was speaking to a major British university just the other day, and the conversation went like this. I said, historically, you guys have always had use it or lose it capital budgets. And they said, look, Andy, the Chinese students didn't turn up last year. That's had a devastating effect on our cash flows. We are not about to fork out millions for our storage refresh through an RFP like we did before. We just can't afford to do that. So I think that the opportunity to move infrastructure, which has hitherto been perhaps habitually in some cases done on-prem, to the cloud, where you know what, you pay for what you need and you stop paying for it if you don't need it anymore. We had customers last year who had to radically downsize parts of their business. And the great thing about an OPEX model is if I divest myself of some part of my business, if I don't need to support it anymore, whereas before I still had the stuff in the racks and the cost being amortized off. Well, for those customers, they were just able to pay us and other cloud vendors less because they needed less. So I think that it's absolutely critical post-pandemic, and that everyone is a lot more focused on those realities, not just the quanta of cost, but the mode of spending from CapEx to OPEX.
And that's probably been part of an accelerated digital transformation journey for
absolutely, no question
as well.
About it. Yeah, no question.
And one thing you said earlier, which sort of brought my attention, perked me up like a double espresso, actually. Do you really mean to say that there's no need for separate backup copies of enterprise file data? Because I know that in this day of ransomware and loss of data, the fear factor is very prevalent amongst leaders. So no need for that.
Yeah, look, there's an entire industry out there, whether it's Commvault or Rubrik or whoever it may be, who will tell you that the right thing to do is to have additional and separate copies. But what I question is the value of that if it takes me time to get it back, especially now in the epidemic of ransomware. It's not enough just to have backup images. The game now is how quickly can I get that back? So that ultimate backup copy that is separate in a vault somewhere, or the electronic equivalent of a vault, is far less valuable, far less useful, given that speed matters, recovery speed matters. And, I need, first of all, not to lose the data. Well, object storage, like I said in the presentation, it's pretty transformational. Object storage is so robust. If you look at the way the erasure coding works across multiple racks, multiple locations, multiple geographies, you could lose Western Europe and still have access to your objects that underlie the file system. Now, if we lost Western Europe, we'd probably have bigger issues. But hopefully you take my point. So the stuff is robust. It's going to be there. But you need, on top of that, the ability to go back to previous versions and to do that very rapidly. And that's something that you can implement in the file system, in the primary file system, given that you've got an infinite number of recovery points. And the reason it doesn't cost what people might imagine it might cost is that the big secret of file storage is that lots of files make a lot of deltas. They change a lot early in their life, but they stop making deltas. And there really is no incremental cost to keeping the stuff forever. If you look at it that way. There is huge value, however, to being able to go back to the minute or two before the file encryption event happened if it was ransomware or whatever the calamity was, and to be able to get it back quickly. Simply put, if you've already got the file data and you can put it in front of your users really quickly, you aren't going to pay the ransom.
And to what extent can people trust moving their files to the cloud? I mean, there's we've seen a lot of breaches over the last year. There's a lot of companies getting fined for breaching GDPR. How much trust can there be amongst the community in moving to the cloud? Because obviously there's a lot of purists out there that believe that on-prem is safest, hybrid is safest. But obviously, as you know, in a month's time, we're going to be talking specifically about cloud at our Cloud First event. Yeah. How can you mitigate the fear that a lot of IT leaders have about the trust in moving files away?
It's a really important point. And look, I think that first of all, some people's assumption that they can protect their data better than some of the biggest companies on earth can, like Microsoft and Amazon and Google, is itself erroneous. Having said that, though, there is a serious point here, which is that there is, especially here in Europe, there is a difference between the regulatory regime that we have with GDPR and things like the USA Patriot Act, which says that a US-owned corporation can and should, without telling you, reveal data to their authorities over there if so asked. There is a way to overcome that, though. Now, people talk a lot about encryption in transit, encryption at rest. What I think is important is pre-encryption, encrypting the data before it goes to the cloud, because that gives you the opportunity, and this is something we bake into our product, I'm sure other people do it as well, but that gives you the opportunity to use your own encryption keys before it goes into that storage environment, which is regulated perhaps by someone else. And so the US feds could demand Microsoft or whoever, give access to that data, but they won't be able to make sense of it unless you also give them the keys to decrypt it. And of course, you're not bound to do that here in Europe. So there are certainly ways through that. Most customers do ask about this and want to understand this because, data privacy, I think, is a bigger issue than data security even. Data privacy is not optional here in Europe, and it's very important.
And I was actually having a chat with a friend last night over Messenger, and we were chatting about different events that we're planning to do. And we got onto the subject of data, and we got onto the subject of storage. And I want to know whether or not you think he's wearing a tinfoil hat, because he said to me, data storage is becoming decentralized. So goodbye cloud storage, big tech's cash cow. He said, I don't think Azure and AWS will still be around in 5 years. He said, it's all Filecoin, Sia, Storage, Swarm. They're the decentralized storage solutions that use blockchain. They are going to be the ones that sort of take over the industry. What's your point?
I got my tin hat on, so I'm ready to go.
What's your perspective on decentralization? Just to throw that out there.
That's a pretty radical view, but I love the question. I love the discussion too. So first of all, he's not wrong about decentralization. In my terms, I would say that's the importance of the edge and edge computing. And it's actually, like so many things, the combination of technologies that gives you the value. The telephone on its own wasn't that useful. The telephone with data across those lines is far more useful, right? And so it's the combination of edge and cloud infrastructure. The advantage that cloud infrastructure has is economies of scale. The advantage that the edge has is the locality of processing close to users. So the combination of those two things, I think, is the big opportunity. I'm delighted to hear that he thinks that Microsoft and Amazon aren't going to be worth a lot in the future, and I will definitely do him a deal on his Amazon and other stock if he has a strong view on that. I'd be happy to take them off him.
Brilliant stuff. Andy, as ever, absolute pleasure. Thank you for Nasuni's support. Folks, you can go and speak to Andy. You can go and speak to the rest of the lovely Nasuni team on the stand. Don't think there's a £500 Amazon voucher up for grabs there as part of the prize draw they're running. Andy, always a pleasure. See you on the 23rd of June.
Likewise, mate. Can't wait.
Thanks. All the best. Folks, thank you very much indeed for joining us in session 2. This will be available on demand if you want to share it or review it, or if you've come in at any point in time, you can see the whole thing again. It's on our YouTube channel, but will also be on the platform for the next 7 days. Over in the main room, we have got Ileana Vidili, who is an author and customer centricity advisor. She's actually currently now just started her talk on challenging times and how they shape consumer sentiment and behavior. But on behalf of myself, thank you for joining us.